Good morning, and welcome to the virtual worship service of the Unitarian Universalist Meeting House of Provincetown, where we affirm the inherent worth and dignity of every person, and where we support each other on our spiritual search for truth and meaning. My name is Reverend Kate Wilkinson, and I am so glad that you have joined us this morning. Happy 4th of July! Driving through Orleans this week, I saw the most enormous American flag I've ever seen. It was quite spectacular, actually. And whenever I see the American flag, I feel a lot of different things at once. Maybe you do too. Part of me feels a deep pride in this country, and part of me gets really anxious at such displays of patriotism, because so often patriotism is used as an excuse to hoard resources, to exclude people, to go to war even. This feels like a direct contrast to our 7th principle of Unitarian Universalism: respect for the interdependent web of existence of which we are a part. I mean, it's not like the web of life stops at the border. Oftentimes, we are asked to put away our critical thinking skills in order to embrace a blind patriotism. This year, patriotism was used as an excuse to attack our own Capitol building and to put people in danger. But the flag also stands for freedom, for free thought, and for the democratic process. That's one of our 7 principles too: the right of conscience and the use of the democratic process within our congregations and in society at large. And even when we are not perfect at those things, they are still something to celebrate. I remember a few years ago when Racial Justice Provincetown was not allowed to march in the 4th of July parade. We were devastated, but we used the democratic process, collecting signatures and appealing to the select board to get our voice heard. And the next year, we were allowed to march in the parade, and it's become a tradition to march for racial justice for all on the 4th of July in Provincetown. We get the loudest cheers when our section of the parade comes through, because justice for all is also what the flag is supposed to stand for. And sometimes, when our country disappoints us, it's up to each of us to uphold the democratic ideals that this country was founded on. Edward Everett Hale said, "I am only one, but still I am one. I cannot do everything, but still I can do something. And because I cannot do everything, I will not refuse to do the something that I can do." This morning, my friend Claire is going to tell you the amazing story of someone doing the something that they could do to, in their eyes and conscience, uphold democracy. What was that thing? It might surprise you. And today, at Claire's church, her congregation will be watching a sermon that I preached. It's fun to feel connected to the fallen congregation in Lexington, Massachusetts today. Lexington is, of course, the place where the first shot of the Revolutionary War was fired, leading to independence. And it's also wonderful to feel connected to all of you watching at home. So now, while I light our chalice here in the meeting house, I invite you to light a candle wherever you are. In that way, we can feel connected even while we are apart.
People say, what is the sense of our small effort? They cannot see that we must lay one brick at a time, take one step at a time. A pebble cast into a pond causes ripples that spread in all directions. Each one of our thoughts, words, and deeds is like that. No one has the right to sit down and feel hopeless. There's too much work to do. And now we will light the chalice. Amen and blessed be.
Love is the spirit of this meeting house. This is our great covenant, to dwell together in peace, to seek the truth in love, and to help one another.
Dona nobis pacem, pacem, dona nobis pacem, 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 dona nobis pacem, dona nobis pacem, dona nobis pacem.
Our reading this morning is Crossing by Jericho Brown. Jericho Brown is a contemporary Black American writer who has won many awards for his poetry. Claire chose this poem by him because of its spirit of irrepressible boldness. Crossing. The water is one thing, and one thing for miles. The water is one thing, making this bridge built over the water another. Walk it early. Walk it back when the day goes dim. Everyone rising just to find a way toward rest again. We work, start on one side of the day like a planet's only sun, our eyes straight until the flame sinks. The flame sinks. Thank God I'm different. I've figured and counted. I'm not crossing to cross back. I'm set on something vast. It reaches long as the sea. I'm more than a conqueror, bigger than bravery. I don't march. I'm the one who leaps.
With me, and please don't flee. I look inside when it's hard to see. This eventide, take a ride around the bend. Still with me, abide when the shadows begin. So much has faded, left me jaded. God is change, it's complicated. From growth to decay, emergence be beyond thought and strategy. wisdom is with us in liminal spaces, feeling so breathless. Death is an exhale, inhale with us. New life cuts through strife like a knife. Somehow we take it in, moving for the win, shaping change, and from endings begin. You are a holy friend.
Good morning, folks. I'm Reverend Claire Feingold Thorne. I serve Fallen Church in Lexington, Massachusetts. Thank you for having me in your pulpit today, and thank you to your minister for preaching for my congregation this summer too. We can be bold. We can do hard things. We can face the coming changes. We can refuse despair. We can leap. James Baldwin wrote, "Not everything that is faced can be changed, but nothing can be changed until it is faced." Imagine, like Jericho Brown's poem, we face a river crossing. The bridge will carry us over. We are not crossing to cross back. We are set on something vast. We have all marched and may march again, but now we are the ones who leap. I want to tell you a story today about a very unusual act of patriotism. It's a story about someone who was no one, but who changed the world with her actions. She leapt across a bridge she couldn't cross back, and she lit a flame that sparked a fire of truth and justice. I find her story inspirational and encouraging. It gives me hope. It gives me courage. It reminds me of Reinhold Niebuhr's words. Nothing worth doing is completed in our lifetime. Nothing true or beautiful or good makes complete sense in any immediate context of history. Nothing we do, however virtuous, can be accomplished alone. No virtuous act is quite as virtuous from the standpoint of our friend or foe as from our own. And so together we are saved by hope, love, faith, and forgiveness. I first heard the true story about Judy Feingold when this book came out. I had heard in history classes about the shocking 1971 burglary of the Media, Pennsylvania FBI office and the aftermath, but the identities of all the burglars have been unknown for decades. And then one by one, over the years, they came out. By 2014, there was only one left unidentified, the only one who kept the original promise the 8 burglars had made to each other to keep what they had done a secret forever. Well, this is Judy's story. She was the 8th burglar. In the 1960s, our country was in turmoil. Vietnam, civil rights, civic unrest, police brutality, riots. At that point, J. Edgar Hoover had been in charge of the Federal Bureau of Investigations, the FBI, for 40 years, and his power was growing unstoppable. There were really 2 FBIs, the public FBI that Americans revered as their protector from crime, arbiter of values, and defender of liberties, and the secret FBI, only known to people inside the Bureau. The secret FBI usurped citizens' liberties, treated Black citizens as though they were a danger to society, and used deception, disinformation, and violence as tools to harass, damage, and silence people whose political opinions Hoover opposed. The ideals that this country has had from our creation, freedom of speech, of religion, the freedom to gather, freedom of dissent, were all under attack by Hoover's FBI. Sound familiar? And instead of 4 years, it had been 40 years. The FBI was infiltrating peace and civil rights movements with informants and disrupting them from the inside. Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. was surveilled, harassed, and persecuted by federal agents who sent him horrifying and threatening messages. And also, ordinary citizens, college students, professors, anyone who had ever expressed even the mildest sorts of dissent against what the American government was doing were under surveillance. Our basic freedoms were under attack, and most people didn't even know it or believe that it could be true. Hoover had so much power that no one could stand up to him until a few people did. Enter Judy. In 1971, 50 years ago, Judy was 19. She was living in Philadelphia. And one night she met with 7 friends. They were all people with pretty ordinary, normal lives who believed deeply in nonviolent resistance. Judy was the youngest. The rest were in their 20s, 30s, and 40s, a social worker, a daycare teacher, a cab driver, a couple of college professors. A few of them were parents of young children, some were single graduate students, some were college dropouts. That night, they formed the Citizens Commission to investigate the FBI. Their investigation would take nonviolent civil disobedience to the highest and most risky level. They decided to burglarize a suburban office of the FBI and steal the files stored there. Then they hoped they would have proof of the terrible misuse of power at the federal level. In order to protect the American values of freedom of speech and dissent, they would commit a felony and risk the consequences. What they were going to do was illegal, but they were following their moral law. So this group of ordinary, normal citizens became burglars. They cased the joint. They practiced lockpicking. They chose a night carefully, the night of the fight of the century between Muhammad Ali and Joe Frazier, in the hopes that the 24-hour security guards would be glued to the radio, just like the rest of the country. With the help of a single crowbar, they broke into the Media, Pennsylvania office of the FBI and stole every single last file there. Paper files. One member of their group, a parent of young children, had a big boat of a station wagon that could fit all the paper files. They drove to a farmhouse in the countryside, and there, with fear in their hearts, they read through the files, sorted them, and mailed them to journalists and members of Congress. And then they promised to each other they would never speak of it again. Judy and her friends hope to show that it is possible not to be powerless in the face of massive power. They hope to show that fighting injustice and governmental violence can be an act of nonviolent resistance. They hoped to make Americans free to speak their minds. They were fully aware that what they planned to do could, whether or not they achieved their goal, take away their freedom, perhaps even endanger their lives. But they decided their desire to stop injustice was more important to them than their desire to lead a normal, uninterrupted life. Their burglary had radical implications and results. The files that they stole and mailed out made it clear that the FBI had been running a program called the Counterintelligence Program, COINTELPRO, a covert, violent, and illegal program that was indeed surveilling, infiltrating, discrediting, and disrupting domestic political organizations. The proof was finally out there. COINTELPRO was over. Hoover was furious. He set off a 5-year manhunt with more than 200 FBI agents. They never caught Judy, and they never caught any of the other 7 people either. Judy knew what she had to do to stay free. She ran. Judy left town and headed west, moved into the underground and lived under an assumed name, moving from place to place west of the Rockies for years, owning only a sleeping bag and what she could carry in her knapsack. She called her parents and told them she had committed a nonviolent direct action and was possibly being pursued by the federal government. She told them she could not be in touch by phone and she would do her best to let them know how she was, but not where she was. Judy spent a decade living under a different name, a fugitive. She could only work jobs that paid her under the table without tax records. She found safe places to live through an informal network of rural properties in the West, known as women's land, places where lesbians build alternative communities that were intentionally free of patriarchy. Judy loved living close to the land, having jobs in nature, living in women's only spaces. But she missed keeping in touch with loved ones, being able to return to beloved people and places. She didn't get to go home for Thanksgiving. She couldn't pop in for her little nephew's birthday parties. She was set apart. One time, Judy was living and working on a farm, and for whatever reason, federal agents drove up to talk to the owner. Judy had to run instantly and not look back. Judy spent 43 years in secrecy. She told a reporter that she accepted her life. She knew when she made her choice, the only crime she had ever and would ever commit, that she was choosing an action with serious consequences, and that her life would be fundamentally changed. She gave up her normal life because she could not accept as normal the violence of the Vietnam War and the violence of the FBI. Well, I wondered how Judy was feeling, what advice she might have for us. WWJD, what would Judy do? I decided to ask her myself, which I could do because Judy Feingold is my aunt-in-law, my husband's aunt. And this is what Judy said. She wrote, "I live in gratitude. I practice loving kindness. I believe that the personal is political, and the way you are in this world and how you interact with other beings manifests and creates ever-increasing circles of love. You can come from a place of fear or a place of love in your lives, and I choose love." She went on to say, "That's how I practice, being the radical lesbian feminist revolutionary that I am." What a blessed label. I mean, really. I'm a humanist first and foremost. What do all human beings want? Humans and mammals, and all of us. We want food, unpolluted water, shelter from harsh elements, comfort when we hurt, companionship through joys and sorrows, to have purpose and feel part of a larger community. I asked Judy, what would she say to a 19-year-old today? She said, "Whether you are 19 or 91, we need to ask questions of the people in power. We need to probe what people are doing. We need to investigate the relationships that exist in the military-industrial complex. We need to keep asking questions." She finished up by saying, "So now you know where your sweet husband's mommy's sister is coming from. Love, Judy." Judy Feingold was a normal person who made a totally not normal choice. She did find a happy life for herself, but it was not a normal life. And I think that is important for us to remember. We cannot let racism and corruption and violence be normalized. We cannot let lies and deception and incompetence be normalized. Our love of country, Our patriotism can take a lot of different forms. Sometimes the letter of the law and the call of the Spirit take us in different directions. The work of justice, the work of change is like a river. It goes on and on for miles past the point of our vision. We are at a crossing point, a merging point, a delta. We're about to step onto a bridge that will take us somewhere new. Jericho Brown wrote, "I'm not crossing to cross back. I'm set on something vast. It reaches long as the sea. I'm more than a conqueror, bigger than bravery. I don't march. I'm the one who leaps." We can be conquerors. We can be brave and bigger than brave. If there is a march, we'll come to it later. But for now, let us be the ones who leap. May it be so. Amen.